The smallest act of kindness can change the fate of an entire kingdom. The first snow of the season settled quietly across the Blackstone forest, covering forgotten trails, weathered stones, and broken branches beneath a blanket of shimmering white. Most wolves remained inside their warm homes whenever winter arrived, but Emily Carter had never enjoyed that luxury. At 23, the gentle Omega had become almost invisible to her own pack, known less for who she was than for what others believed she would never become. She wasn't the strongest. She wasn't the loudest. She wasn't the one anyone expected to lead. Every morning before sunrise, while the rest of the village prepared for another ordinary day, Emily slipped into the forest carrying nothing more than a woven basket, a thick wool cloak, and the quiet hope that she might gather enough herbs to help the elderly healer who had once shown her kindness when no one else had. The icy air stung her cheeks as she carefully stepped over frozen roots, her boots leaving delicate tracks behind her. Sunlight filtered through towering pines, turning drifting snowflakes into tiny crystals that sparkled like scattered stars. Emily paused beside a cluster of winter herbs, pushing stubbornly through the frost. She smiled softly. Life always found a way. She admired that. It reminded her not to surrender, even when every whispered conversation in the village suggested she should simply accept being overlooked forever. Earlier that morning, she had passed the training grounds where younger wolves laughed together while preparing for the coming moon festival. No one invited her to join them. A few barely acknowledged her presence at all. She had learned long ago that silence hurt less than cruel words, yet every ignored greeting still lingered inside her heart longer than she wished. Even so, bitterness never took root. She believed kindness was not something given because others deserved it. Kindness was something a person chose because it reflected who they truly were. A sharp breeze carried an unfamiliar sound across the trees. Emily stopped walking. At first, she thought it was only the wind slipping through distant branches, but then it came again. A tiny whimper. Faint. Fragile. Almost swallowed by the forest itself. She slowly turned toward the sound, listening carefully. Another soft cry echoed from somewhere beyond a fallen oak covered in fresh snow. Setting down her basket, Emily carefully climbed over the trunk, brushing powder from her sleeves as she searched the shaded hollow beyond it. There, half hidden beneath tangled roots, lay the smallest wolf pup she had ever seen. Its silver-white fur was dusted with snow, and one tiny paw was trapped beneath a broken branch. Wide golden eyes looked up at her, filled not with anger, but with confusion and exhaustion. Emily's heart tightened instantly. "Oh, little one," she whispered gently as she knelt beside it. "How did you end up all alone?" The pup watched her carefully but made no attempt to growl or pull away. Instead, it blinked slowly, as though the simple sound of a calm voice offered comfort after a very long journey. Emily carefully lifted the branch, making certain not to frighten the frightened little creature. Once free, the pup tried to stand, only to stumble awkwardly back into the snow. It released another quiet whimper that echoed through the silent woods. Emily removed one glove before reaching out. "It's all right," she said softly. "I'm not going to leave you here." For a brief moment, the tiny wolf hesitated. Then, to Emily's surprise, it gently rested its small head against her hand, closing its eyes as though it had been waiting for someone exactly like her. High above the trees, unseen by anyone below, a lone hawk circled once before disappearing toward the distant mountains, carrying with it the first silent sign that somewhere beyond the forest, an entire kingdom was desperately searching for its missing heir. Emily wrapped the tiny wolf pup inside her wool cloak, holding it close as she carefully made her way back through the quiet forest. The little creature barely weighed anything, yet every few steps she glanced down to make sure it was still breathing peacefully. Whenever the cold wind swept between the trees, the pup instinctively nestled closer against her, and Emily smiled despite the chill creeping into her own hands. By the time she reached her small cottage at the edge of Blackstone Forest, the afternoon sun had already begun slipping behind the pines. Her home was modest, built from weathered timber with ivy climbing one side of the porch, but it was warm, welcoming, and filled with the comforting scent of dried herbs hanging from the ceiling beams. She gently placed the pup on a folded blanket beside the fireplace before adding another log to the crackling fire. Soft golden light filled the room, replacing the cold, gray colors of winter with a peaceful glow. Emily carefully examined the little wolf once more. The trapped paw appeared swollen but not seriously injured, and several small scratches covered its silvery fur, likely earned while wandering alone through the dense woods. She dipped a clean cloth into warm water, speaking softly the entire time as though comforting a frightened child. "You have been very brave," she whispered, "but now you can rest." To her surprise, the pup watched every movement with unusual focus. Most young animals trembled around strangers, yet this one seemed to study her face with remarkable patience, almost as though it understood every word she spoke. When Emily gently cleaned the last traces of dirt from its fur, the little wolf lifted one tiny paw and rested it on her wrist. The simple gesture made her laugh quietly. "Well," she said with a gentle smile, "I suppose that means we are friends now." She prepared a small bowl of warm goat's milk mixed with herbs that would help restore strength. At first, the pup sniffed cautiously, then eagerly drank every drop before looking back at her with bright golden eyes that already seemed far more energetic than before. Emily could not help noticing how unusual the pup truly was. Its fur shimmered almost like fresh snow beneath moonlight, and a faint pattern near one shoulder resembled an elegant crescent shape that she had never seen on any ordinary wolf. She brushed the thought aside. Nature often created beautiful surprises. Outside, evening settled quietly across the forest. Snow continued falling in slow, gentle waves while smoke curled peacefully from the cottage chimney. Inside, Emily sat beside the fire repairing one of her old mittens as the tiny wolf wandered curiously around the room. It investigated shelves filled with herbs, sniffed wooden furniture, then finally climbed into her lap without hesitation. "I guess you have decided where you belong," Emily whispered, stroking the impossibly soft fur behind its ears. The pup answered with a contented little sound before curling into a tight ball and drifting to sleep. Emily leaned back in her chair, feeling a warmth she had not experienced in a very long time. The quiet cottage no longer felt empty. For the first time in months, loneliness seemed to loosen its grip on her heart. Far beyond Blackstone Forest, however, dozens of riders crossed frozen valleys beneath the evening sky, carrying the silver crest of the royal kingdom. Lanterns swayed beside their saddles as they searched every road, every village, and every mountain pass. At their head rode a tall man wrapped in a dark winter cloak whose calm expression could not completely hide the worry in his silver eyes. Alpha King Ethan Blackwood had promised himself that he would not return to the capital until his missing son was safely home, unaware that the little prince was already sleeping peacefully beside the warm fireplace of a woman whose kindness was about to change all of their lives forever. The next morning arrived wrapped in pale winter light, and for the first time in many months, Emily woke to the sound of cheerful little footsteps instead of silence. She opened her eyes to discover the tiny wolf pup sitting beside her bed, watching her with bright golden eyes and an expression that looked surprisingly patient. The moment she smiled, the little creature wagged its tail enthusiastically before hopping onto the blanket as though it had known her forever. Emily laughed softly, a sound that had become far too rare in her quiet little home. After preparing a simple breakfast for herself, she poured another small bowl of warm goat's milk for her unexpected guest. The pup eagerly finished every drop before following her around the cottage with endless curiosity, sniffing baskets of herbs, peeking beneath wooden chairs, and occasionally stopping to look out the frosted windows toward the snowy forest beyond. Watching the little wolf explore every corner of the house filled Emily with an unfamiliar warmth. It felt as though the cottage itself had come alive again. She noticed that the swelling in its tiny paw had already begun to fade, far faster than she had expected. Even more remarkable was the quiet confidence with which the pup carried itself. Although it was still very young, there was something graceful about every movement, something almost regal that did not belong to an ordinary forest animal. When Emily brushed a few loose strands of silver fur from its shoulder, she noticed the faint crescent-shaped marking once again. In the morning sunlight, it seemed almost to shimmer beneath the fur before fading back into its natural color. She tilted her head with quiet curiosity, but quickly smiled to herself. Nature had always been full of mysteries. Far beyond Blackstone Forest, however, peace was nowhere to be found. Inside the towering halls of Blackwood Castle, every corridor echoed with hurried footsteps as royal messengers carried reports from every direction. Large maps covered an enormous oak table where colored markers showed the countless places already searched during the previous day. None had brought encouraging news. Alpha King Ethan Blackwood stood silently before the map, his broad shoulders straight despite the exhaustion hidden behind his calm silver eyes. He had ruled with wisdom and strength for many years, earning the loyalty of every neighboring pack. Yet no title or power could quiet the concern of a father searching for his only son. Captain Daniel Hayes stepped forward, lowering his head respectfully before speaking. "Your Majesty, every northern village has been searched. Rangers have followed every trail leading through the mountains, but we have found no sign of the young prince." Ethan remained silent for several moments before answering in a steady voice. "Then we continue. Lucas knows these forests better than most adults. If he is frightened, he will seek kindness before shelter." Several advisors exchanged puzzled glances. One elderly council member finally asked, "Do you truly believe someone would help him without realizing who he is?" Ethan looked toward the snow-covered mountains visible beyond the castle windows. A faint smile touched his face despite the worry weighing on his heart. "The people I trust most are often the ones who expect nothing in return." Hundreds of miles away, Emily knew nothing about the desperate search unfolding across the kingdom. She simply bundled herself in her winter cloak and prepared another trip into the forest to gather herbs, while the tiny wolf happily trotted beside her through the fresh snow, leaving a trail of tiny paw prints behind them. Neither of them noticed the distant figures standing among the trees on a nearby ridge, quietly studying the unusual little wolf with growing interest before disappearing silently into the forest shadows. Emily had always believed the forest rewarded gentle hearts with quiet miracles, but over the following 2 days she began noticing small details that made her wonder if the tiny wolf pup had wandered into her life for a reason far greater than chance. It seemed to understand every word she spoke. Whenever she carried baskets of herbs through the snow-covered trails, the little wolf stayed close without ever straying too far, pausing whenever she paused and looking back whenever she slowed down. It even seemed to recognize which plants she reached for, patiently sitting beside her until she finished gathering each bundle. One crisp afternoon, Emily knelt beside a frozen stream to collect winter moss, while the pup chased drifting snowflakes with playful excitement. Its joyful leaps brought an unexpected smile to her face, and for a brief moment, she forgot every lonely day that had come before. Suddenly, the cheerful little game stopped. The pup froze, ears lifting toward the distant trees. Emily noticed the change immediately. She followed its gaze but saw nothing except tall pines swaying gently in the cold breeze. The forest had become strangely quiet. Even the birds had stopped singing. A faint crunch of snow echoed somewhere beyond the tree line. Emily slowly stood, placing her basket against her hip while gently calling the little wolf back to her side. The pup hurried over without hesitation, pressing close against her boots. Moments later, 3 unfamiliar travelers emerged from the woods wearing heavy winter cloaks that concealed most of their faces. They smiled politely, but something about the way their eyes immediately settled on the silver-white pup made Emily instinctively tighten her grip on the basket. "Good afternoon," the tallest stranger said with practiced friendliness. "We are searching for a rare young wolf that wandered away from its family. Have you happened to see one nearby?" Emily glanced down at the little creature, now hiding partly behind her cloak. She remembered how frightened it had looked when she first found it alone beneath the fallen tree. Without thinking, she answered carefully, "I have only seen the usual wildlife in these woods." The strangers exchanged quick glances before one of them took a slow step forward. "If you do happen to find such a wolf," he continued, maintaining the same calm voice, "there would be a generous reward for anyone willing to return it." Emily nodded politely, yet her instincts refused to relax. There was no warmth in their smiles, no concern in their voices. They looked at the tiny wolf the way merchants examined something valuable rather than the way someone searched for a missing family member. After a long, uncomfortable silence, the strangers finally thanked her and continued walking deeper into the forest. Emily waited until they disappeared among the trees before kneeling beside the pup. "I do not know who they are," she whispered softly while gently scratching behind its ears. but I think we should go home." The little wolf looked up at her with those brilliant golden eyes and gave a tiny approving sound before following her without hesitation. High on a rocky ridge overlooking the forest, the same three strangers stopped and watched Emily's distant figure disappear between the snow-covered pines. The tallest one lowered a small brass spyglass and quietly said, "There is no doubt now. The royal marking is real." Another answered with quiet satisfaction, "Then the heir has finally been found." Far away, Alpha King Ethan Blackwood received another report that brought no answers. Yet as he looked toward the endless winter horizon, an unexpected feeling settled deep within his heart. Somewhere beyond the frozen forests, his son was still alive, and someone with extraordinary kindness was already protecting him without asking for anything in return. Emily barely slept that night. The polite smiles of the strangers lingered in her thoughts far longer than she wanted to admit. Every instinct told her that they had not been ordinary travelers searching for a lost animal. They had looked at the little wolf with careful attention, almost as if they already knew exactly what they were looking for. Early the next morning, fresh snow blanketed the forest once again, covering yesterday's footprints beneath a clean layer of white. Emily stepped outside carrying a bucket of water while the tiny wolf bounded happily around the yard, chasing drifting snowflakes with the same carefree excitement that always made her smile. Yet today she found herself glancing toward the tree line more often than usual. The forest felt different. Quiet. Waiting. She finished filling the bird feeders near the porch before kneeling beside the little wolf to straighten the soft wool scarf she had loosely tied around its neck to help keep it warm during the colder mornings. The pup responded by gently touching its nose against her hand before happily trotting after a bright red cardinal that had landed on the fence. Emily laughed softly. "Do not wander too far," she called. "I cannot lose you now." As the morning passed, she gathered firewood while the little wolf remained close, carrying tiny sticks that were much too small to be useful, but proudly dropping each one beside the growing pile. The simple game filled the quiet yard with warmth that had nothing to do with the fire burning inside the cottage. Then the little wolf suddenly stopped. Its ears lifted toward the forest once again. Emily followed its gaze. This time she heard the sound as well. Horses, several of them, not rushing, but moving with steady purpose through the snow. A few moments later, a group of riders emerged from between the towering pines. Unlike the strangers from the previous afternoon, these visitors wore elegant dark cloaks fastened with silver wolf crests that caught the winter sunlight. Their horses moved calmly, their formation disciplined without appearing threatening. At their center rode a tall man whose quiet presence seemed to command respect without a single word. His dark winter cloak moved gently in the breeze, and although snow rested across his shoulders, his silver eyes remained fixed on the tiny wolf standing beside Emily. The little pup stared back for only a heartbeat before letting out an excited cry unlike any sound Emily had heard before. Without hesitation, it raced across the snow toward the riders. Emily instinctively took a step forward, worried it might be frightened away, but before she could speak, the tall man had already dismounted. Instead of reaching immediately for the little wolf, he lowered himself onto one knee, allowing the pup to reach him first. The tiny wolf bounded straight into his open arms with unmistakable affection, happily wagging its tail while pressing against his chest. Relief washed across the man's face so quickly that it almost erased the calm dignity he had carried only moments earlier. He closed his eyes briefly, resting one hand gently against the pup's back as though silently thanking fate itself. Emily watched the touching reunion with quiet surprise. Whatever she had expected, it had not been this. After a long moment, the man slowly stood and turned toward her. Their eyes met across the snow-covered yard. His expression carried gratitude, exhaustion, and quiet respect all at once. Before introducing himself or asking a single question, he inclined his head with sincere appreciation, a gesture so genuine that Emily immediately understood one thing with absolute certainty. The tiny wolf she had rescued was far more important than she had ever imagined. The little wolf remained nestled comfortably in the tall stranger's arms, yet every few seconds it twisted around to look back at Emily with joyful golden eyes, as though eager to introduce the two most important people in its small world. Emily stood quietly in the snow, still trying to understand what she had just witnessed. The riders surrounding the stranger carried themselves with perfect discipline, but none spoke until he did. His voice was calm, warm, and steady. "My name is Ethan Blackwood." The name settled over the quiet clearing like a sudden winter breeze. Emily had heard stories of the Alpha King since childhood, stories describing a ruler whose wisdom united distant packs, and whose courage earned the loyalty of an entire kingdom. Yet the man standing before her looked nothing like the distant legend people whispered about around village fires. He simply looked like a father whose greatest fear had finally come to an end. Before Emily could respond, the tiny wolf gently slipped from Ethan's arms, trotted across the snow, and stopped beside her once again. It leaned affectionately against her leg before looking back at Ethan with unmistakable excitement. Several royal guards exchanged surprised glances. One quietly murmured, "Your Majesty, His Highness has never trusted a stranger so quickly." Emily blinked in confusion. "His Highness?" she repeated softly. Ethan smiled with quiet understanding. "There is something you deserve to know." He knelt beside the little wolf, gently resting one hand upon its silver-white head. A soft glow shimmered through the cold winter air, gentle as moonlight reflecting across fresh snow. Emily instinctively stepped back in astonishment, not from fear, but from complete surprise. The tiny wolf slowly changed before her eyes until, standing where the pup had been only moments before, was a young boy wrapped in a warm royal cloak much too large for his small frame. His bright golden eyes were exactly the same. So was the joyful smile that Emily had come to know over the past several days. Without hesitation, the little prince ran straight toward her. "Emily," he exclaimed happily as he wrapped his small arms around her. "I knew Father would find us." Emily could hardly find her voice. Her eyes filled with tears as she gently embraced the child who had shared her fireplace, followed her through snowy fields, and fallen asleep in her lap each evening. "You are the prince," she whispered. Lucas nodded proudly before looking toward Ethan. "She saved me, Father. She took care of me every single day. She gave me warm milk. She fixed my paw. She even shared her blanket when I was cold." Ethan watched the simple conversation with deep gratitude shining quietly behind his silver eyes. He stepped forward and bowed his head, not as a king receiving praise, but as a father honoring someone who had shown extraordinary kindness without expecting recognition. "Emily Carter," he said sincerely, "you protected the heir to my kingdom when you believed he was only a helpless little wolf. You offered compassion when you had every reason to walk away. No reward can truly measure what you have done for my family." Emily lowered her eyes, embarrassed by the attention. "Anyone would have helped him," she answered softly. Ethan glanced toward his royal guards, many of whom silently shook their heads. They all knew the truth. Not everyone would have stopped. Not everyone would have opened their home without asking questions. Lucas reached for Emily's hand with one small hand while holding his father's with the other. Standing together beneath the gently falling snow, the three of them shared a quiet moment that none of them fully understood would become the beginning of a story the kingdom would remember for generations. The journey to Blackwood Castle began the following morning beneath a sky of pale blue and drifting winter clouds. Emily had never traveled beyond the villages surrounding Blackstone Forest, and every mile revealed sights she had only heard about in stories told around small fireplaces during long winter nights. Lucas rode beside her in the royal carriage, unable to hide his excitement. He pointed toward distant mountains, sparkling rivers, and ancient watchtowers, eagerly explaining every landmark as though he had been waiting his entire life to share his favorite places with a friend. Every few minutes he reached for Emily's hand simply to make certain she was still there. Ethan noticed the quiet gesture more than once, and each time he found himself smiling without realizing it. When the towering gates of Blackwood Castle finally appeared on the horizon, Emily could hardly believe such a place truly existed. Massive stone walls rose above the snowy valley, their silver banners dancing in the cold breeze. Hundreds of people lined the grand courtyard as word spread that the missing prince had returned safely. Relief filled every face. Servants, guards, advisors, and villagers gathered together, their expressions bright with gratitude. Yet before the joyful welcome could fully begin, several royal advisors approached Ethan with visible concern. One elderly council member bowed respectfully before speaking. "Your Majesty, rumors have already begun spreading through neighboring packs. Some believe the prince was deliberately hidden." Quiet conversations rippled through the gathered crowd. A few unfamiliar nobles exchanged uncertain looks as they glanced toward Emily, standing quietly beside Lucas. One man spoke carefully, though his words carried unmistakable doubt. "No ordinary villager simply discovers the heir to the kingdom by chance." Emily lowered her eyes, suddenly aware that dozens of strangers were studying her. The warmth she had felt during the journey quickly gave way to uncertainty. Before she could speak, Lucas stepped forward with surprising confidence. He stood in the center of the courtyard, his small voice carrying farther than anyone expected. "Emily did not hide me," he declared. "She saved me." The entire courtyard fell silent. Lucas turned toward the assembled nobles with complete sincerity. "When I was cold, she kept me warm. When I was hungry, she shared her food. When I was afraid, she stayed beside me. She never asked who I was. She only cared that I needed help." Every word echoed through the courtyard with remarkable clarity. Ethan watched his son proudly, saying nothing as Lucas continued. "If Emily had not found me, I would have been alone in the forest. She treated me like family before she knew my name." Several members of the royal guard nodded in quiet agreement. Captain Daniel Hayes stepped forward as well. "Our investigation confirms the prince's account," he announced. "Lady Emily accepted no reward, asked no questions, and sought no recognition. Every witness along our search route supports the same conclusion." The doubtful whispers gradually disappeared. Faces that had shown uncertainty softened into quiet admiration. Ethan finally stepped forward, his calm voice carrying the quiet authority that had united the kingdom for so many years. "Character is revealed by actions taken when no one is watching," he said. Emily Carter believed she was protecting a helpless little wolf. "That single act of compassion has brought my son safely home. There will be no accusations against the woman who reminded this kingdom what true kindness looks like." The courtyard remained silent for one long moment before respectful applause slowly spread among the gathered crowd. Emily looked toward Lucas, who smiled proudly up at her before slipping his small hand into hers once again. Standing beneath the fluttering silver banners, she realized that although she had arrived at the castle as a stranger, she no longer stood there alone. The days that followed felt almost unreal to Emily. Every morning she expected to wake inside her little cottage beside Blackstone Forest, yet each sunrise greeted her through the tall windows of Blackwood Castle, where golden light spilled across polished stone floors and ancient tapestries. Even surrounded by such remarkable beauty, she remained the same quiet woman who found comfort in tending herbs, helping others, and asking for very little in return. The servants quickly noticed that she never treated anyone as beneath her. She thanked every cook who prepared a meal, smiled at every stable hand she passed, and often wandered into the castle gardens to care for winter flowers that many believed would never bloom until spring. Her kindness spread through the castle more quickly than any royal announcement ever could. Lucas followed her everywhere he was allowed. If she visited the library, he insisted on carrying the books. If she walked through the gardens, he happily gathered fallen branches so she could reach the flower beds more easily. The lonely halls that had once echoed only with formal conversations now carried the cheerful laughter of a little prince who had finally found someone who loved him simply for being himself. Ethan quietly observed these moments whenever his responsibilities allowed. He often stood unnoticed along the upper balcony overlooking the gardens, watching Lucas race across the snow while Emily patiently showed him how tiny green shoots could survive beneath the frost. The sight stirred memories Ethan had almost forgotten, memories of simpler days before duty had consumed nearly every hour of his life. One afternoon, while reviewing petitions inside the council chamber, Ethan realized he had paused several times, distracted not by reports or treaties, but by the sound of Lucas laughing somewhere beyond the open windows. It had been far too long since joy had filled the castle so naturally. Later that evening, Ethan found Emily arranging fresh herbs inside the royal greenhouse. Soft lantern light reflected through the glass ceiling while snow drifted gently outside. "The gardeners tell me these plants have never looked healthier," he said with a warm smile. Emily looked slightly embarrassed. "They only needed someone to notice them," she answered quietly. Ethan studied her thoughtful expression before replying. Sometimes people need the very same thing. His words lingered between them longer than either expected. Emily lowered her eyes, unsure how to answer. Throughout her life, she had become accustomed to being overlooked. Hearing someone acknowledge her with genuine respect felt unfamiliar in the gentlest possible way. At that moment, Lucas rushed into the greenhouse carrying a small wooden box decorated with carved wolves and tiny silver stars. He stopped in front of Emily with obvious excitement. "Father helped me choose this," he said proudly. "It is for your herbs, so you will always have a place to keep your favorites." Emily carefully opened the box and smiled at the thoughtful craftsmanship. "It is beautiful," she whispered. Lucas beamed with happiness before slipping his hand into hers once again. Ethan watched the simple exchange and understood something that no royal advisor could have explained. His son no longer saw Emily as a guest. He saw her as home. Looking around the peaceful greenhouse, Ethan realized that the warmth filling Blackwood Castle had not come from blazing fireplaces or grand celebrations. It had arrived quietly with a compassionate woman who had never asked for recognition, yet had somehow reminded an entire kingdom that the strongest hearts were often the gentlest ones. Several weeks later, the first signs of spring quietly touched the kingdom. Patches of snow melted beneath the warm afternoon sun, streams flowed freely once again, and tiny green leaves appeared along the ancient trees surrounding Blackwood Castle. The entire kingdom gathered for the annual festival of the first moon, a celebration that honored new beginnings, hope, and the promise of brighter seasons ahead. Families filled the castle courtyard. Musicians played cheerful melodies, children laughed beneath rows of silver banners, and lanterns swayed gently in the fresh mountain breeze. Emily stood near the royal gardens wearing the same quiet smile she had carried since the day she first found a frightened little wolf beneath the fallen tree. Although many people now greeted her with admiration and gratitude, she had never allowed recognition to change the person she had always been. She still thanked every servant by name, still cared for the castle gardens each morning, and still found joy in helping others without expecting anything in return. Lucas ran happily through the courtyard greeting everyone who had come to celebrate. Yet every few moments he glanced around until he found Emily, making certain she remained close. Seeing her, he hurried over with the same bright smile that had first welcomed her into his little world. "Come with me," he said excitedly as he gently took her hand. Before Emily could ask where they were going, Lucas was already leading her toward the center of the courtyard, where Ethan waited beneath the ancient moon tree whose silver blossoms had become the symbol of the kingdom's unity. Hundreds of people gradually fell silent as the prince stopped between them. With one small hand he held his father's, and with the other he held Emily's. Looking up with complete sincerity, Lucas smiled and said, "The kingdom feels like home. Again because both of you are here." Gentle laughter and warm smiles spread through the crowd. Emily felt tears gather in her eyes as Ethan looked at his son with unmistakable pride. Then Ethan turned toward her. His expression carried the same quiet honesty she had first seen on the snowy morning outside her cottage. "Emily," he said softly, "when you found a frightened little wolf, you saw only someone who needed kindness. You expected nothing in return, yet your compassion gave my son safety, gave me hope, and reminded this entire kingdom what true strength really is." He paused for a moment before continuing. "A crown can guide a kingdom, but only a generous heart can inspire its people." Emily lowered her eyes, deeply moved by his words. "I only did what I hoped someone would do for me," she answered gently. Ethan smiled. "That is exactly why your kindness matters." Around them, the gathered crowd applauded with genuine affection rather than ceremony. The royal advisors, castle servants, village families, and visiting pack leaders all stood together, united not by power, but by gratitude. Above them, silver blossoms drifted softly from the moon tree, carried by the gentle spring breeze across the joyful celebration. Lucas squeezed both of their hands and laughed as flower petals floated around them like tiny stars. In that quiet, unforgettable moment, Emily realized that destiny had not changed her because she had rescued a prince. Destiny had simply revealed what had always been true. A compassionate heart could accomplish what strength alone never could. And throughout the kingdom, People would remember that the future of their royal family had been shaped not by greatness seeking glory, but by one ordinary woman who chose kindness when no one was watching.